You are listening to Lilydale Radio. This is Beyond with me, Tiffany Hopkins. Did you know that this podcast is or you could call it a radio show, it's both, is a production of Normalized Talking to the Dead? Have I told you about what Normalized Talking to the Dead is? It's a website, normalizedtalkingtothedead.com, and it's a site that I made to help, as you may guess, normalize talking to the dead. And the reason I made it is because I live in Lilydale, and in Lilydale, talking to the dead is normal. And I wanted to make a place for other people to get to feel what it's like to experience a little world where it's normal to talk to the dead. And that's because it really opens up the potential for us to explore what we're capable of when, things are considered normal by the people around us. It's not required. It's not a prerequisite. Normal isn't great, and we don't want to normalize everything. And I know it's hard because lots of bad things are normalized, and but there is something to be said for what it is like to do something that other people around you think is normal, right? And the hurdles we go through to do things that for us are correct and right, but maybe other people don't think are normal. And with those things, for me, one of those is mediumship. And it makes a big difference if we have other people to do these things with. I always say I don't know if I would have become a medium if I didn't live here, because I had a lot of preconceived notions about what it was. I didn't consider myself the kind of person that would do that kind of thing because it didn't really make a lot of rational sense. But here I am. I do it all the time. So Normalized Talking to the Dead is my attempt to make resources for other people who want to talk to the dead, for people who want to talk about talking to the dead. I say that normalizedtalkingtothedead.com is a place for mediums and the people who love them. And I just put a new resources section up, and in that section, I put a glossary. And the glossary actually was something I made for my book called Beyond, a Living Person's Guide to the Dead. And I realized that a lot of the words I'm using aren't necessarily weird words, but we don't always know what they mean. And if you just Google spirit, you're going to get a definition, but it might not be the definition that I would use, my community would use, people who have a positive understanding of mediumship would use. And so I wanted to create a list of words and how I interpret their meaning for my readers and for all of you, my listeners. And so all of these words are used in my book, and I put their definitions on the website. You can go to normalizedtalkingtothedead.com/glossary, GLOSSARY. If you want to look at it, well, I'm talking to you during this episode because I'm going to use a lot of words, as you might imagine, as I talk you through some of the things I have on the page. And the other thing I want to note is that if you have ideas for other words to put in here, if you have questions about the definitions I put up here or additions, send me an email. There's a little form on the page for you to put info into. And I also want to say, of course, these definitions are always changing. I've changed them a bunch since I first started making this glossary, and they're just my interpretation. There's a lot of stuff in here that the word is used for other things in many places. Medium is a classic example. Medium being, well, what is it to you? Like, if you hear the word medium, what is the first thing you think of? Just the first thing. And then if you just narrow it to medium, as in what we're talking about, like, what do you consider a medium? Because I often say someone who talks to the dead, but there's a lot of nuance in there, and a lot of people in my community do not say that. A lot of people in my community, for example, they say there is no death. So, you know, immediately saying talk to the dead is not correct. A lot of people in my community say it's communicating with spirit loved ones. And I think that's important too, because talking is just one part. Like, what about listening? What about all the other forms of communication? I really use talking to the dead as a phrase because I think it's quick and to the point, and it sort of gets your attention. It's not the entire picture. And, sometimes I feel like it's a little crass almost, and I like that. That's part of why I've chosen it. Um, but on the site, for example, I'll give you my definition of medium that I put in my glossary here. So I wrote, a person who serves as an intermediary between humans and other than human contacts, bringing in information from the contact for personal use, creative work, or a sitter. And so we already have in that definition at least two other words that need definitions, which is contact and sitter, right? Because contact could mean anything. And again, if we compare it to the kind of more traditional definition of medium is someone who has spirit communication, I am using this other than human contact. And contact is one of the big words I use all the time because I'm not focused just on spirit. And actually, spirit isn't a word I'm super comfortable with. I don't really love the word spirit or spiritual. I like to use other words. And so I use the word contact for anybody I engage in mediumship with. So a contact could be anything. And I might do a whole episode just on potential contacts. But spirits are absolutely in there, as well as literally anything you could want to communicate with, right? So I have, as I say all the time in this show, I have really expanded the definition of mediumship as best as I can to include anything or anyone or any time or any place that you might want to communicate with. And so I use the word contact in meditations, in instruction, throughout the book, in other definitions. I'm going to use the word contact all the time. And I sometimes expand the word contact to the word source. And I use that because sometimes what we communicate with or what we connect with in mediumship is not actually an individual being, or it's something bigger than that, right? Like collective consciousness or the universe or all of the spirit realm, right? And so I use the word source when we're not talking about an individual. So a contact being an individual or a single being, or a group of being if you say contacts, but a source being a little bit amorphous, like general place or, group of contacts, you could say. And then the other vocab word we have in that definition is sitter. And this is a really traditional word in mediumship that I have done nothing to change. It is simply the person who receives what a medium gives. So that could be a reading or a message or a piece of artwork or a written communication. But a sitter is a person who maybe comes to a medium to get a reading, the most simple definition. And, anybody, if you're paying for that, you could be considered a client. But a sitter is a more general term that speaks to the person that's receiving the information. If a medium isn't working with another person, medium might be their own sitter, right? They might be bringing in information from a contact for themselves. If there is that third person there, that's the sitter. So we've got a couple basic words ironed out. The other thing in there, defined mediumship as a collection of skills, which we talked about in an episode uh, about a month ago, I think, exactly a month ago, is a collection of skills that enable a medium to connect, collect, and communicate transphysical data as meaningful information. And we've got some more vocab words already. And I will say that I have a little habit of creating words, and I have definitely created a few words that you will find in this glossary and in my book. And the most important for me is the word transphysical. And it's not really a creation of mine. It's like, I obviously put together two words, trans and physical. But that happened because I got really tired of talking about non-physical things. And I really wanted to define what we're communicating with um, in a way that wasn't a negative, non-physical, right? I don't want to define the thing by what it is not. And so I thought I would use something else. And it turns out the word trans means beyond. And one is Greek and one is Latin, and people will complain. However, the word meta, that's also often combined with physical, metaphysical, has a lot of connotations. If you think about what metaphysical means to you, just take a notice of both what that means to you, but also how you feel about it. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of um, just less positive. I wouldn't quite go as far as negative connotations with metaphysical, but it's just not something I want to be super involved in. Um, and for me, a big part of that is because meta to me implies above and that it's better than physical. And I don't think that. I think the physical world is super important and it is where we exist in a large part, but we also exist beyond the physical, right? And so the word transphysical is my attempt to broaden our lexicon to give us something that feels comfortable. It doesn't feel, to me, related to how things have been considered in the past. The other term that could be used is simply spiritual, because physical or material could be kind of thought of as the opposite of spiritual. And again, we get back to, for me, I just don't want to talk about spiritual all the time because it again has a connotation to it that implies something moral, something maybe related to religion. And I don't think any of this necessarily has to be religious or a traditional definition of spiritual, but the like down to brass tacks definition of spiritual as not physical, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. And I wanted a new word, so I made one. I hope it makes sense to you. And you will see I use the prefix trans a bunch of other times for other things that are traditionally thought of as a binary, and that we want to talk about potentially all aspects of that binary at one time. And that's the thing about transphysical data, is that I think of it as including physical, because we don't actually know where our physical data and our non-physical data end, right? We don't know. Energy is technically physical data, and a lot of energy can be measured. We don't know exactly what, like, there's no little box that these things fit in that say this is physical data, this is non-physical data. Energy sits in this box, and words sit in this box, and psychic things sit in this box. I'm trying to give us language so that we can acknowledge that we know things don't fit in these little boxes quite so simply. And part of that is really confusing, and we're like, no, it's too much. And then part of that is really liberating. Like, we just don't know, but we're still engaging with it. We have an internal experience, and we have experiences with non-physical beings and entities and these kind of trans-physical contacts that are real to us and to each other and to the all the experiencers. And so, yeah, let's get some new words in here. So if we're kind of extending, another way to think about mediumship is I kind of refer to it occasionally as transphysical communication, right? So we're basically saying we are communicating beyond just the physical plane, just words or our voice or written text. It really includes anything that kind of pushes past that boundary of what we think of as physical. And this is a little bit like I kind of we have the term ESP, which is extrasensory perception. And I do think that is a little bit related. It basically is saying, extrasensory is we're saying it's outside of our normal physical senses and it's things we can still perceive. And I do think that's part of what's happening when we engage in transphysical communication. And ESP is really another way just to say psychic. And the word psychic is in the glossary as non-sensory. That's all it really means. And it's also a person who brings in non-sensory information. And, we often, in the mediumship circles, a lot of people say all mediumship is psychic because it is bringing in information that is not in our physical senses. But psychic communication actually is a wider set of contacts. And in some ways, we could think of mediumship the way I'm defining it as potentially just psychic. However, psychic information tends to be one direction. You're kind of picking up non-sensory information, and mediumship to me really includes the communication part, the back and forth. And that's where I think it's really important to include in your understanding of mediumship a two-way street, that it is you and your contact, and there could be a sitter there too, which would make it a three-way street. I don't know if the metaphor keeps going there. But what's important is it's not just about you. It's also about your contact, what they want and need, and what they're trying to communicate, and your sitter, if you have a sitter. So I'm just going to pick some random words in here that I think are often asked about or misunderstood. Ooh, I'm going to do seance next. So a seance is a French word, and it just means session. And I think it's a very cool word. And in our community, it's generally considered or used for a specific type of mediumship called physical mediumship. And it usually means that there's a single medium and a number of sitters, and that single medium stays the medium the whole time and kind of brings information to the sitters. But it's usually focused just on physical mediumship. So it's less about words coming from the medium and more about either trance communication. So it's like the medium isn't really involved. They're letting spirit kind of come in more deeply to the medium, or physical phenomena, which means things are moving without a person touching them. So this was very, very popular like 100 years ago, and it is less popular now, but it is definitely happening. And in physical mediumship, you also hear about apports sometimes it's called. And these are things that a spirit brings, just kind of conjures out of thin air. Sometimes they're like coins or little gemstones or seashells or things like this. And you also hear the word ectoplasm. And ectoplasm, I always thought of it as the physical manifestation of the spiritual, but I was reading a book my neighbor Tom gave me recently, and it has a definition that says a book from a long time ago. It has a definition that's it's actually spirit taking like cells from a human and kind of bringing them out to and manipulating them like bodily fluid cells. Yeah, I know. um Physical mediumship isn't super popular, or it wasn't, especially through the last generation, I would say, but I think it's really coming back. It's also kind of flashy and wild. So I think, already I'm talking about bodily fluids. Who would have thought? Yeah, it's just a different world sort of. But I think a lot of the terms from physical mediumship are quite famous, like ectoplasm and seance. So I wanted to talk about them, even though I don't do a ton of that work. I do have one group I sit with every week, as much as I can make it, to practice that kind of stuff. And we do call it a seance. But the big difference between a seance and, say, if you've ever heard of a gallery reading, is when a medium there's still a single medium or maybe a few, but they're kind of up in front and they give a number of people in the audience a short message. And a seance is usually seated in a circle. And if it is physical, then it'll be in the dark. And gallery readings are going to just be in a gallery, for example, or a library or a bookstore or church or something like that. So I'm just kind of like going through a lot of words here. But I mentioned the word trance, and I want to talk about that too, because that's sort of another loaded word. It's generally just a term for being out of a normal state of waking consciousness. We use it in mediumship to talk about a specific level or type of mediumship that the medium is kind of removing themselves and is less present, and the spirit or the contact is more present. This is like on a continuum. If you think of mental mediumship as the spirit is there, but the medium is still kind of calling the shots. And then the next stage, a little deeper, would be a trance, where the medium is a little more removed and the spirit has a little more control. The next phase being maybe physical mediumship, where the spirit is actually maybe moving the human's body or things from the body. And then we can talk about possession, which is where the spirit has been completely taken over the human's body. And these are all on a spectrum, and they're all practiced by people today in our world, in our country. If you're in the US, I'm assuming it's in every country. These are kind of ancient practices. And I've never engaged in any possession, but I've read a lot about it because I think it's very interesting. And the thing that I understand to be sort of the salient feature, other than just how present the spirit is versus the human, is that it's really used in a religious context, with very specific deities or spirits that are brought in. So it isn't something like mediumship. I go into spirit realm and just like see who's there, right? And I try to connect with a loved one of my sitter or something like that. And in possession, it's not just usually a dead person or even a dead person, but a specific deity that is part of the religion or the community that's practicing it. So there's a lot of tradition around it. There's a lot of protocol, and a lot of kind of rules and regulations that are there to protect the person engaging with it, and that are passed down through spiritual or religious lineages. And I say all that because it is more kind of involved, and I think it requires more training and more care than maybe mediumship does. Although I do still, if you've listened to this at all, you probably know how important I think safety and caring for yourself is with mediumship. And there's a lot to consider. It's not really a loosey-goosey kind of thing, because it requires so much from a person. So there's kind of like a spectrum of a bunch of things you may have heard in terms of types of mediumship. And again, if you want to read some more about this, check out the glossary page for the definitions. And then, of course, in June, when my book's out, you'll be able to read lots more about all of these. So yeah, let me pick another random word out of here. Let's see. I wish I could get live feedback and you could tell me what word you want to. Everybody think about what word you want me to define. And I'll see if I can pick it up from the future. Some of these words I know a really good one, and nobody's going to be telling me they want this defined. So wait, let me check if there's one that somebody might be. Intuition. So I'll go back to the other one. Intuition. This is one that gets thrown around a lot. And how does intuition compare to, say, mediumship and information from mediumship? And in a way, you could think of intuition as mediumship with your body, maybe. Because, or at least how I define it in here is that this is intuition is information that comes out of the rational intelligence of a person's mind. And it can include things like neuroception, bodily awareness, extrasensory perception, and or sub or unconscious processing. And so what are we talking about, huh? We use a few vocabulary words in there. One I haven't defined yet is neuroception, which I have defined in other episodes, but give me a minute and I'll get back to that one. I want to talk about more generally intuition being our ability to know things without like rationally and consciously thinking about them. And so this is information that maybe is just from our body. And one of the ways that this happens is this neuroception, which is a like technical scientific term for our body's ability to I'm going to use the word listen, which isn't the technical term, but it's to pay attention to our environment and the people around us and to decide our nervous system's state, whether we are safe or not, all below our level of conscious awareness. So our body is always doing this. And for me, this is one of the coolest ways that science overlaps with mediumship. And that's why I've done whole episodes on it. And I'll probably do more whole episodes on it because it is so cool. This is all based on polyvagal theory, if you want to look it up. But basically, we are going around all the time. Our body is going around all the time, just paying attention to everything that's going on around it and deciding without our brain involved, like our conscious brain involved, if we're safe or not. And then whether we're safe or not determines our heart rate, our breathing rate, if we're digesting, if we need to fight or flee, if we need to rest, if we can digest our food, all these different states in our body and what we're able to do. So this, to me, is part of our intuition, in that we actually know a lot about what's going on around us without consciously thinking about it. And if we expand that to all the other ways, we sort of just know stuff and have a level of knowledge about what we need and what's happening in the world around us without thinking about it. And I really like separating it out from conscious or rational thought, or like being able to deduce the answer to something, because those two things are often at odds in our own experience. I know one of the tools that I use is changing from paying attention to what my mind is suggesting when I'm trying to solve a problem to what maybe my heart suggests. And I actually move my attention from my head into my heart and just listen to what's there, like physically, like my attention I like imagine all of my attention in my heart space and then see what comes up. And this is my version of kind of mediumship with the body, to get more intelligence than just comes from me thinking about it, and gives me a way to get it to reach out for it instead of just waiting. Intuition is one of those things that just hits you. And I think a lot of that is neuroception of like our body just receiving information, deciding our state, and then we feel a change. Our heart rate picks up or slows down, our breathing changes, and that actually brings it to our conscious awareness, and so that we can know, oh, that's not safe, or oh, I feel better now. Um, I'm talking about that too much because I love talking about that. I'm gonna have to do another episode on it. It's my favorite. I think it's so fascinating. Um, the other word I skipped over before was ontological shock. So this is a word I just want to bring into people's vocabulary if you don't have it already. And I think this will be our last word, even though there's dozens more. So ontological shock is, I'm going to read the definition here, the occasional consequence of the disruption or challenge of our fundamental understanding of reality or worldview, resulting in disorientation and cognitive dissonance. It can be caused by encountering new experiences or information contradicting deeply held beliefs or assumptions. So you can guess why I have this in here and why it's really important to me. I actually have a whole chapter on developing your kind of framework for how you think about mediumship, and that is to avoid ontological shock. This is, again, a phenomena that occurs with people, is that if we are overwhelmed with too much information that we can't process, that contradicts how we think about the world, it can actually kind of be a problem for us. And it also is a bit of a limiting factor until we start to change our reality, our worldview, our beliefs, or assumptions. We might not be able to even take in information because our body isn't ready for it and our mind isn't ready for it. And what happens if you maybe are overwhelmed, like if you have a word, I'm going to bring another vocab word in. If you have an anomalous experience, which is kind of an umbrella term for anything that is inexplicable, or it's kind of like the whole category of the uncanny. It includes experiences with UFOs or UAPs, extraterrestrials, ghosts or spirits, cryptids, timeline changes, dimension changes, all of these sorts of kind of, this whole category is called anomalous experiences. And if you have one of those and you're not prepared in any way for it, it can be incredibly jarring. And the ontological shock is typically associated with disorientation and cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance just means you have kind of conflicting things happening in your brain, like that you can't necessarily immediately suss out. Like there's contradiction, and this is just so common when you're experiencing this whole world, because we are told, we're going to get back to normalization and where we started today, of like, we're really told that this stuff isn't possible. And if it is possible, it's probably bad, or it means something's wrong with you. And in order to accept that these things are happening or practice them, a lot of times we need to challenge those thoughts. And I know I spent the better part of the last 7 years struggling with this, because part of my brain still is like, this stuff is impossible. It doesn't make sense. And that part of my brain has gotten, a lot of it has shifted perspective and started to understand how much these things are really happening, and that has been based on my own experience with them. And so it's this little tiny push and pull of like, okay, something could be possible. I'm going to explore it. Okay, now I see it's possible. I've experienced it. I'm going to redefine it for myself and then go back kind of again. And this process, I think, is really important, because if we just wholesale say, yes, it's all possible, I believe in all this stuff, we lose the nuance that a lot of these things, a lot of the stories we've been told and the way we've been told these things happen maybe isn't accurate. And so we kind of need to figure it all out for ourselves. And this is a long road to do that. And it requires trying stuff, right? And not just taking other people's word for it necessarily, but creating space in your life for you to experience what it means for you. And that doesn't necessarily have to be with extraterrestrials or spirits. It can be with how you communicate with your body. It can be with how you communicate with nature or your pets or even other humans, maybe humans who are non-speaking or maybe speaking humans. And this work can really change how you communicate with others. So whatever part of this feels right to you, know that when you're changing your mind about something, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, because we really see the world based on what it is we believe and what we assume. And so I hope this whirlwind vocabulary tour helped give you some new words, some new definitions, maybe helped you think of new ways you want to define these words. You don't have to use my definition. You can expand it based on your experience. And if you have, again, requests for more words, put them in on the website. And I hope you can, start to develop a way for you to normalize whatever it is you want to in your life when it comes to your transphysical experience. So with that, I'm going to sign off and I will talk to you next month.